Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome to the basic guide to Variaudio in Cubase. Variaudio is the process of correcting in real time monophonic audio sources, typically vocals, recorded vocals, but it can also be used for processing things like guitar solos. Today I'm going to use a performance of my wife Pauline, who's sung this song that I'm currently writing. I'm going to use this to demonstrate some of its features, and I hope you find this useful. If you do, check out the Patreon and channel member links below. It's an awesome way to help support my channel so that I can carry on making these videos. So here we have the vocal performance. I'm going to use two separate sections of it today to demonstrate Variaudio. And the way we go about it is to simply click on the audio itself. You make sure you've got your lower editor open. You can do this in a separate window, but I like to have this split screen. It basically suits my workflow really nicely. Once you've got the audio visible in the lower editor, you want to open your Variaudio panel in the inspector and activate it. When we do that, Cubase is basically going to process that audio and try to find the pitch in it. And this is why it's important for it to be a monophonic signal, because it's really got to be able to identify. There'd be no point sending a chord into Variaudio, it simply wouldn't know what's going on. Let's have a listen to the phrase in the context of the piece as it stands.
No one to hold me, no one to need.
And the first thing that we want to do is to get this note information as big as possible. We're going to be performing visual editing on these notes, and we're going to use predominantly our eyes to correct it, and then our ears to confirm that what we've done is correct. So we want the notes that we're going to process this bunch of data to be as big as possible in the editor. Now, generally speaking, I'll have a kind of 1/3, 2/3 split on the interface to make the editor nice and comfortable. The next thing that we want to do is to zoom to locators so that the entire cycled area is filling the screen. Now, we've zoomed it horizontally, but it's equally important to zoom vertically. If you press Ctrl and Shift on your keyboard and scroll with your mouse, then you can zoom vertically. That's an enhancement introduced in Cubase 13, and I really like it. You can do the same thing from the piano roll over on the left-hand side. Can you see this area where it turns into the crosshairs? If you click that and then drag left and right, it does a similar kind of thing. Ctrl Shift and scroll with your mouse is much, much easier. Let's have a look at a few of the features in the inspector panel just to understand what we're actually doing. The first thing that you want to do is turn Smart Controls all on. There is an option to say Show Default Smart Controls. Now, Smart Controls are all of these little boxes that pop up around each coloured segment that represents a note or an area of identified pitch in Cubase. And we're going to use all of these little boxes to do all sorts of different editing on our sound, and I want to see them all. If you turn it into default, it basically just reduces the number of options available to you. So you get kind of an edited highlights. No, I want everything, thanks very much. Pitch Snap Mode Absolute is also your friend. It means if you pick up a segment, I'm going to pick up this G3 here, which you can see is slightly sharp. If I pick it up and drag it down onto G3, it snaps it to that note. And in fact, every note that I travel up and down, it's going to move this note to exactly, or as close as possible to the correct pitch. In relative mode, Variaudio will maintain the offset. As you can see, very rarely is relative useful to you. Absolute is generally the way to go. So let's correct these first couple of notes. We have a G3 coming down to an F sharp and then up to a G again. Let's listen to those three notes on their own.
No one to hold.
Okay, time to mute that guitar in the background. Let's go into solo editor mode, so now we can only hear the notes. We will bring that guitar in if we ever need context, particularly if we're performing timing corrections. But generally speaking, for pitch, I'm perfectly happy to mute the rest of the music. I just want to hear the vocals. Each one of these coloured blocks is called a segment. This is Cubase's interpretation of what it thinks the song is doing at this moment in time, and it's actually got it wrong. This is two notes. The G3 coming down to F3, F sharp 3, is two separate notes, and Cubase has interpreted it as a single segment, all largely G3. So I'm going to override Cubase. I'm in complete control of what's going on here. Cubase has basically just given me kind of a starting map. So the first thing that I'm going to do is chop this segment up into two. See this black line at the bottom of the segment? Every time I hover over it, depending on where you are, you're going to get different tools. As we approach the end of the segment, we get a glue symbol, but at the moment I want scissors, and here they are. And the point at which I'm going to cut these two segments up is where the G3 transitions into the F sharp. That's where one note hands responsibility for the pitch over to another note. So I'm using these shaded bars in the background to indicate where that point wants to be, and it's about there. Now I could have undone that process and done it properly. There's actually a mistake in it, but I'll leave it in because it's something that happens quite regularly. I've inadvertently left snap on. I'll just undo that. I don't want snap on. I want to be absolutely micro accurate. So I'm going to go back into my scissors tool and cut up those notes where I really want them to be cut up, which is about there. And now you can see it's a much more accurate cut. So typically you don't really want snap engaged when you're dealing with Variaudio because the levels of granularity are very, very fine. Now we can see these two notes, the G going down to the F sharp. Let's correct the G first. The whole thing is very slightly sharp. Now if I pick up this segment and drag it down, it will actually snap to where Cubase thinks is exactly the point. You can see there's a little line here that's dead in the middle of the note. That's not actually where I want it to be because there's a little bit of natural vibrato in the sound. So I want it to be oscillating around that center point. I need to engage fine-tuning mode in order to do this, and you press the Shift key on your keyboard. And now when I pick up this segment, I have much, much finer control over it. And at the moment, I'm just using my eyes to visually gauge where I think that note probably wants to be. And it probably wants to be about there. Let's do the same thing with the F sharp, which is also a little bit sharp. I'm going to press Shift and drag it down. You're drawing kind of a mental average line through the waveform. Don't worry too much about absolutely nailing this. You're going to use your ears in a moment to see whether or not it sounds right. This third note looks about right. I'm perfectly happy with that being in the middle of the G. So now let's have a listen to those three notes again.
No one to hold.
Yep, I'm pretty happy with that. Now then, what's this yellow segment doing down here? Well, this segment is covering a T sound. It's the beginning of the T. Many consonant sounds don't have tonal quality. For instance, if you make the S sound, if you listen to the sound S, it's actually white noise. If you put that through an oscilloscope, you won't get any tonal sound out of it. It's generally speaking because consonants are so small that we can kind of confuse or diffuse one note into another and identify a tone. It's predominantly vowels that generate tonal quality to sounds. And so where the T is being produced, Cubase can't really identify any pitch. And as you can see, these big long lines that disappear off into infinity. If you have a look at the waveform behind, there's the to word being pronounced. And this segment, this yellow segment, corresponds with that. Well, it's pointless information. We don't really need that segment there. I can simply press delete to throw it away. So this is a really significant thing to remember about Variaudio processing. If you delete information in this editing window, you're not deleting note information. You're deleting correction information. These colored segments are telling Cubase how to shift the audio either in pitch, up or down, or backwards and forwards, warping in time. We'll have a look at an example of a warp a little bit later. It would have been perfectly reasonable of me to leave that segment there. It's really not doing any harm because there's no processing being done inside it. Only when you pick up one of these segments and do something with any one of these editing options does the segment have any real role to play in the song. Otherwise, it's just completely transparent and leaving the audio absolutely untouched. There's one small use case where these segments, these stray segments, there's another one down here, for instance, can get in the way. And it's when you extract the audio out to MIDI. Now today we're all about processing the audio, but I am going to show you an example of extracting the MIDI so that we can see what we're talking about and you'll understand why these spurious segments are a bit annoying. So here's the audio event selected in the project editor. If we drop functions open, there's a feature called extract MIDI. If I select that, a sub box pops up. Now normally speaking, when I'm extracting note information out of audio, I only want the notes. You can ask Cubase to try to interpret pitch bend data as well. I find it's not as good at that as it is at extracting notes. So for today, let's keep it nice and simple. We're just going to extract the notes. I'm going to let it put some velocities into the MIDI notes because why not? It's going to correspond to the volume of the vocals that are being sung. And now I'm just going to say, okay, let's export this audio to a new MIDI track. If I scroll down to the bottom of the project, here are those MIDI notes, and you can see there's one every now and again, or there's a couple over here as well. These outlier notes that are nowhere near the main melody. These are those little artifacts, those things that if you leave them there and you extract the audio out to a MIDI file, they're going to get left behind and potentially be a bit annoying because they're not real note data. So extracting to MIDI is a really nice feature, and this is a great way to turn audio into MIDI information. Let's presume you did a guitar solo. You could extract that guitar solo out to MIDI and then send it through a synthesizer and double up. All sorts of really interesting creative options. But that's the only situation where these spurious segments are going to get in the way at all. Otherwise, just leave them be. Okay, back to processing the audio. What's going on with this pink note? Let's just listen to the phrase.
To hold me.
So this isn't actually a sung note. This is an intense portamento, a lead up into the main note, which is B3. It's kind of a ghost sound, the transition from G up to B. These intermediate events typically want to be left alone. Don't try to pitch correct this because there's nothing wrong with it. That's the vocalist's natural performance, getting them up to the B where we want to land. It's the B that I want to process. You can see it's very slightly flat. We're talking about tiny distances here. Now there's a perfectly reasonable argument to say you don't even need to make a pitch correction that's that small. But just for today's purposes, I'm going to make everything as kind of technically correct as possible without disturbing at all the natural flow of the performances. It's absolutely vital to retain as much of the essence of the performance as you can. After all, that's why we listen to humans and not just computers all the time.
No one to hold me.
Okay, let's deal with the me. So as you can see, it's supposed to be a G and pretty much nailed for the vast majority of it. As the singer comes in, you can see that she's basically started out very slightly sharp and then the brain kicks in and automatically pitch corrects. Do you want to fix that? Probably not. Let's have a listen again.
Hold me.
So it just starts off very, very slightly sharp. Because we're in a demo today and we want to stretch the tools, let's pitch correct it anyway. So I'm just going to fix this very slight pitch variance at the beginning of the note. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. Control-Shift, scroll with my mouse. There's a couple of ways I can approach this. The first thing is that we can tilt the beginning of the note so that it's flatter. Now at the top of the segment, we have a diamond. It's the only non-square symbol. If I hover over that, you'll see it says set tilt or rotate anchor. That anchor relates to two different tilt options at the top left and the top right hand corner of the segment boxes. They both say tilt. So if I pick up the tilt marker and drag the note backwards and forward, up and down, you can see it rotating around this anchor point. Let's just undo that. Now that's no good to me because half of that distance is pitched perfectly correctly. It's only the last little bit that I want to correct. So I can move this anchor. If I pick it up and drag it over to the left, I'm now setting a new anchor. And now when I tilt, I'm going to get completely different behavior. So now I can try to basically just flatten that note out a little bit. Let's see if that sounds any better.
To hold me.
There's no single road that leads to Rome here. All of these solutions are basically just tools in your toolbox, pick the best one for the job. Let's undo that, get us back to where we were. Another option is that I could cut up the segment, leaving alone the section of audio that's perfectly good. And with this big bump, I can flatten it. So to flatten a segment or straighten, we select the box in the middle, the top middle of the segment. It says straighten pitch curve. And now if I drag that down, you see it's flattening the audio. It's also raising the pitch because the overall average is higher than our baseline average. So now I would need to press the Shift key on my keyboard and drag that down a little bit. And you can see if I zoom in nice and tight, That's really pitch corrected that properly now. Let's have a listen to that instead. See if that one's any better.
To hold me. To hold me.
It's flatter, but it sounds a little bit auto-tuned for my liking. So I would probably have gone with option A, where I used the rotating anchor choice.
Hold me.
That's fine. Now we need to decide whether or not the end of this note is a problem as well. If I zoom in, you can see it's actually an intense vibrato. It's not necessarily a raising of pitch. If you have bouncing up and down inside your semitone range, that's essentially vibrato. Do you want to correct it? Well, it depends if it sounds odd.
Hold me.
And I don't think it does. One option, if I did want to flatten it, similar kind of thing, split up the end of the segment and just smooth that out a little bit and then drag it down to pitch correct it.
Hold me.
Yeah, that's fine. I wouldn't have done that edit in the real world. It was perfectly okay to start with. Next note. Firstly, we've got one of these straggling segments. We don't need that. Let's get rid of it. All of this really wants to be F-sharp 3. Well, you can kind of draw an imaginary diagonal line that runs through that note. If we could basically rotate that entire note in one operation, then we would potentially fix this sharp stuff and this flat stuff all in one go. And we can do that. Using the tilt tools, it doesn't matter whether I select the left or the right hand tool here, both going to do the same job. See on the pop-up it says press Alt to rotate. That's the secret sauce. Press your Alt key and now the symbol turns into a tilting, a rotating tool. Now when I pick up the note, you can see what's happening. Now the entire thing is very slightly sharp. So shift click on my keyboard and drag down so that that note is over F sharp. Let's see, listen to that.
No one to need.
Yep, absolutely fine. The final two notes of the phrase go from E down to D sharp. Cubase hasn't successfully identified that that's two distinct notes. No problem. I can simply cut them up. So again, I'm going to choose a transition point just between E and D sharp, which is somewhere around here. And now I can drag the E slightly sharp and pretty much leave that D sharp alone. Right at the very end, it tails off a tiny bit. Let's have a listen if we want to just raise this final little phrase a little bit.
No one to need.
Maybe. Let's move the anchor and just give the note a bit of a bump at the end so that it doesn't go flat.
No one to need.
Never step out of a Variaudio session without putting it back in the context of the song and making sure you've not broken anything.
No one to hold me. No one to need.
And we haven't. It sounds great. Maintained all of the natural performance of the vocals. I've done a little bit more here than I ordinarily would. I generally speaking like to leave the occasional air quotes flaw. You know, it's a very kind of grey area exactly what is a flaw. But we're here to demo the tool, so I'm going to do as much as I can with it. Let's jump to example number 2. And in this case, we have the singer starting to sing a little bit too early. And I'll show you why. We're coming out of a section where the guitar slows down dramatically and there's a bit of a pregnant pause before the music starts again. There's no click track for this song. It was played naturally. This is what it sounds like.
Drifting on and
So you can hear Pauline kind of reaching for the note. She doesn't know exactly when it's going to happen because she doesn't have that click track to work to. And she just comes in a little bit early and kind of stretches that note a bit. So we want to move it in time. We want to move that note in time. Once I've picked my cycle zone, it's just over 2 bars this time. I can zoom to selection, make sure that my vertical zoom magnification is correct. And now I need to leave the guitar running because I'm doing temporal processing. So there's absolutely no point doing this without the guitar there to help me fix what I think is a problem.
drifting.
So what I actually want to do is slightly squash this drifting. Rather than it being elongated, Just want to kind of crush it together a little bit. We can do that using warp. So if we move over to the left-hand side of the segment, here's our warp start. If I pick that up and drag it to the right, you can see the entire note being compressed in time.
Drifting on. Drifting on.
That sounds much more natural now.
Drifting on endless.
Now we need to pitch correct because we actually start off flat. This note, which is being indicated as a D, it's a D3 really, actually wants to be all the way up here. This curious segment in the middle is nothing. The entire sung phrase is on the note E. So let's do some manipulation on this segment so that I can show you the various options available. First thing is that we could just delete it. If there's no tonal content there, there's no work for Cubase to do, so we don't particularly care. The next thing that we could do is to join these two segments together. If the entire thing is supposed to be in E, then theoretically we can make them all one segment. That's going to introduce an issue. I'm going to glue these two segments together and we'll see what the issue is. So I'm going to hover over this little line at the bottom of the segment, move over to the right hand side where the glue symbol comes up. It's going to leap over this gap and glue these two segments together. Now look what's just happened to this note down here. Cubase is treating all of this segment information as one continuous whole, and so we've lost the ability for that granular editing. In other words, that glue process did not work. I need to treat these two segments separately because I've got different kinds of audio processing to do on them. Don't get confused into thinking that what you're doing in the Variaudio screen directly translates into pitched information in the song. It doesn't. This bit of the phrase needs to be pitched up by a semitone. This bit of the phrase doesn't. You can change the size of segments as well. Let's say we want to fill in this gap to ensure that any processing that's being done on this early part is carried over for as long as it can possibly be. Well, ordinarily, when you click on the left or right of the segments, you warp them. In other words, you stretch them in time. Just undo that. That's not what we want to do. We actually want to make the segment itself bigger. You hover over the box. It says press Alt to correct segment end. That's what I want to do. So press the Alt key. Now I'm just making the visual segment bigger. I'm not doing anything to the audio at the moment, apart from the fact that I have performed pitch correction on this segment. So any audio that exists inside this area of the event is going to get pitch corrected properly. Sometimes it behooves you to extend or shrink segment sizes. Sometimes it doesn't matter at all, but the option is there. Let's have a listen to that.
Drifting on endless days.
Okay, this G is largely fine. We're very slightly flat when we come into the note, so we'll do maybe a tiny tilt at the beginning. But in terms of pitch, I'm perfectly happy with that. Coming down to the F sharp again, the average pitch of that note is completely fine and doesn't need to be moved. All of this jagged stuff is an S. Remember when I said S was basically just white noise? Cubase doesn't know what to do with it. So if there's an elongated S, you'll lose your pitch information.
Endless day.
It matters not a jot. There's no difference in Cubase processing that because there's no tonal content to find. So don't worry about trying to flatten this thing to oblivion in order to get all of the data inside your coloured segment. That's not what Variaudio is all about. It's about correcting genuinely tonal pitch information, which is done perfectly fine. Leave it alone. I'm just going to solo the editor and then we can decide if we want to do anything with this E3.
Endless days.
Yeah, we do start sharp, don't we? For the part of the note where it's in tune, I'm going to leave it alone. So I'm going to split the segment up and I just want to do some correction on this early part. Do I want to rotate it or do I want to flatten it? Let's try rotating. So I'll press the Alt key, rotate the note. It visually looks okay. What does it sound like?
Endless days roaming.
Yep, fine. There is also a pitch bump at the end. Do I want to do anything about it? I'm not sure.
Endless days roaming.
Let's try setting out anchor right at the point where it starts going sharp and drag it down a bit.
Endless days.
Yeah, we just de-emphasise that pitch bump a little bit. Let's leave that. And all of this wants to be a D sharp. We don't need this nonsense at the beginning. And yes, there's another one down here. Don't want that spurious segment either. Here's the sibilant S, where we lose our tonal information. Do we want to do anything about this wild vibrato at the end?
It's roaming the seas.
Absolutely not. That's the good stuff. That's what you want in your vocalist's performance. Do not flatten that, and turn it into some... No, I'm not even going to go there. That's a modern tendency to auto-tune everything to oblivion. I love that kind of natural vibrato, and I'm going to leave it there. Lots of different processes applied to that audio. Let's take it out of solo. Have we broken it?
Drifting on endless days, roaming the seas.
No, we haven't. It just sounds better than it used to. It was already good. Now it's better, and we've not taken away any of that natural characteristic of the vocal performance. One final optional thing for us to do, and it is optional, I don't always do this in my songs, to ease the CPU burden, you can bake all of those changes into the event itself. At the moment, it's all just configuration information that's sat on top of the audio. And if I go into functions, I can reset all changes and throw away everything that I've just done. Every Variaudio change would disappear. On the other hand, if I say flatten real-time processing, they'll all get baked into the audio, and it's effectively like a bounce. So all of that processing that Cubase is having to do in order to make all of those corrections will all get, as I say, baked into the audio. So if we do that, we're asked what algorithm preset we want to use, but we only have one choice. So thanks very much for that. Let's just get on with it. And that's it. You see now all of the Variaudio information has disappeared. There is no Variaudio information anymore. This audio event is as if it was recorded exactly like that. And now we would have to reactivate Variaudio so that it can process that information again and come to new conclusions about what the pitch information in this audio event is. And there it all is. Hope you enjoyed this one today. Please hit like if you did. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you next time. Thanks very much.